Here is a fundamental premise that underlies my approach to Socratic questioning, and indeed to everything else that I do in the classroom. And that is that content is nothing more or less than thinking. That content is not something other than thinking, that you don't teach content for a while and then you teach thinking, that thinking cannot exist without content, that is, contentless thinking is unintelligible, and content that is not thought cannot be understood. So that content and thinking are not two separate things, but one integrated whole. The mind learns content through thinking. Content has been produced by thinking, organized by thinking, it's understood by thinking, it's applied by thinking, it's transformed by thinking, it's evaluated by thinking. Thinking is not in opposition to content. And those who say, I'd like to foster thinking, but I have too much content to teach, are revealing in that they understand neither content nor thinking, because they have misconceived the intimate relationship, at least as I see it, between these two. So, in a way, we can express the goal of any class. The teacher should be able to answer the main goal or express the main goal in one of these two ways. The main goal is to think historically, think geologically, think geographically, think architecturally, think anatomically, think chemically, think philosophically, think ethically, think some way. Or to think like a chemist, like a nurse, like an engineer, like a poet, like a dramatist, like a novelist, like a citizen, like a whatever. So it seems to me, if we understand content as thinking, then one translation that we should be able to make is to talk about our content as thinking. So that's another background premise to what we're doing. Here is another way to look at that background premise. If content is thinking, then content generates further content. Now, this is the nature of content to generate further content. Why? Because content is thinking, and thinking always generates further thinking. So as chemistry advances, the content of chemistry, that is the thinking of chemists, generates further content because they keep thinking in new ways. The content opens up new ways to think, and thinking in these new ways, they generate further content, and so it goes. So we now think about content as something alive in the mind, and we want our students to think critically precisely because we want our content to take root in the thinking of our students. We want the content to be alive in their minds, because if it isn't alive in their minds, they're not learning it. We want it to transform the way they think, so that at the end of a course in history, the students should think historically in a richer and better way. And at the end of a course in math, their mathematical thinking should be richer and deeper and more skilled. We want, therefore, to put them into possession of a new mode of thinking, or rather to take a rough and ready mode of that thinking and to develop that. So we want them to become a perpetual generator of new thoughts, understandings, and beliefs. If you understand historical thinking, you're going to do more and more historical thinking, and this will generate new understanding, new comprehension. So if we can get that process going, we can get them to think historically, then for the rest of their life, that historical thinking is going to be generating further understanding, and many, many things are going to come of it because their content becomes an instrument of insight. And therefore, as educators, we design instruction with these ends in view so that students take charge of their thinking and continually upgrade it. So we're trying to get a process going, I often think of it like kindling a fire or priming a pump as a teacher. I'm trying to get something started. And then once it gets started, what I want to do is go in and fan it and get it, and I'm obviously at the fire metaphor here, to get the fire from a spark to a flame, from a flame to a torrent of flames, to get them inflamed with the thinking of the subject so that that thinking really gets off the ground. So these are background premises for what we're doing. Now, this is a somewhat different way to put it. Content as a mode of thinking driven by questions. Now I'm bringing questions in. Why questions? Because just as in traditional teaching, the assertion is the main ingredient. Remember this, and remember this, and remember this, and remember this, and this is important, and don't forget this, and then there's this, and then there's that. Assertion, assertion, assertion. In critical thinking, we realize that the thing that gets thinking going is questions. That questions are the driving force, the affect behind thinking. No questions, therefore, we recognize, is a sign of a failure to succeed. And if, when we stop talking to our students, a sea of hands go up, and they want to eagerly ask questions, then we have very successfully done our job. The fire has started in their mind. The questions are starting to come. Their thinking is beginning to be engaged. Therefore, we don't say, do you have any questions? We rather say, what are your questions? And I sometimes use this exercise with my students. I'd like everyone to write down one or two of the most important questions that are occurring to you now as you try to understand this. If you have no questions, write down the following. I am not thinking well enough to have a question. And I mean that literally. And I think students should own it. That when I have no questions, I'm really not thinking. Perhaps I'm just passively listening, impressionistically listening, and this is really not engaging my experience, and I'm therefore not at the point where I'm really getting at the puzzles that are inherent in this. Okay, so these are some background premises. Let me give you a couple of others. The spirit of critical thinking. Here's part of the spirit of critical thinking. We would like our students to think in the following way. Recognizing weaknesses is a strength. We're going to question together. We're going to share ideas. And one of the things we'll discover, hopefully, is weaknesses in our own thinking. If we don't discover weaknesses in our own thinking, how are we going to improve it? So to discover weaknesses is not a failure. It's a success. And so we want to look at a different attitude toward, quote, mistakes, misunderstanding, or confusion. To discover a mistake, to discover a misunderstanding, to discover a confusion is an important discovery in the learning process. You should feel good about it, not bad about it. Well, this is part of the spirit we want. We also conduct our Socratic discussion with the hope that this spirit is alive in the minds of our students. There's a logic to what we're talking about, and I can figure it out. This subject makes sense. It's intelligible. The parts fit together in a very logical way. And I can, as a thinker, enter into this logical system and internalize it because it makes sense, and I know how to do that. Along with this, then, is a kind of positive attitude toward learning. There is a better way, and I can find it. I can think better about this. I'm thinking historically now, but I can think even more historically or more precisely. I can increase the quality of my historical thought. And then when I do that, I can make it even better than that. I can go as far as I want to go in improving my mathematical thinking, my sociological thinking. It all depends on me and how motivated I am to develop my thinking further and further and further. This is the spirit that we want to be generated in our students.